So, no matter how long ago I can really think back, but I can think back to, if people remember, when Robert Kilroy Silk used to be. He was essentially Nigel Farage. If people can remember that far back, I remember, Silk saying the EU would not be here in 5 years, and of course, we've long passed that point years ago, because again, when Robert Kilroy Silk was in charge of UKIP, that was like in the 90s, I believe it was. Was that like the mid 90s or the late 90s? I can't remember. That's quite old, but I just barely remember that. And he was not and has not been alone. Pretty much every single anti-EU person, especially UK Eurosceptics, love to doomsay and doom predict about the EU. But surprisingly, and what really is surprising, the EU is incredibly resilient. It is incredibly confident. It is incredibly robust. A lot of these crises that have said, the EU will not survive this one, this will be the crisis to take the EU down, hasn't. It has only gone on from strength to strength, predominantly because people in Europe are a lot more politically turned on. They're a lot more aware of what goes on in the European Parliament, and because of that, there is overwhelming support for the European Union in many countries throughout Europe. And what's even more funny is that during 2016, after we left, Nigel Farage was heavily predicting that other countries would follow our lead. Not a single one has followed our lead. And more importantly, a lot of Europe's far-right nationalists and their own Eurosceptics have changed their tune completely on the EU. So, and it's not surprising, really. Partly because, as I've said, there is a massive difference between our Eurosceptics and European Eurosceptics. And the majority really is, for our Eurosceptics, it was all about getting out of the EU's regulation. They are free market fundamentalists to a T, whereas the European Eurosceptics, completely different for their somewhat similar. There are crossovers, not going to deny that, but the main difference is that absolute, we don't want any regulation whatsoever, and that's why they hated the EU so much, and that was what drove them to try and get out of the EU. So today we're going to come across a article in the Financial Times all about just how stable the EU really is and why it has confounded so many doomsayers over the past few years. But before we get into that, please do remember to hit that like and share button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as a link to my one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And thank you to all those people that do support me those ways. So on to the article. And this comes from the Financial Times today. So the title is, "The EU Stability Will Again Confound Its Critics." So every time a crisis has hit Europe, whether it's debt, refugees or COVID-19, the prophets of doom predict the worst for the EU. And at the height of the euro crisis, many suggested that the Europe's single currency would not survive. And I was among those who thought the refugee crisis of 2015 could make Brussels irrelevant. The pro-Brexit British press continues to predict the collapse of the EU on an almost weekly basis. And COVID-19 has brought a fresh new blast of pessimism. The American economist Paul Krugman recently reviewed the EU's pandemic performance and concluded the European project is in deep trouble. And there is little doubt that the EU's performance on COVID-19 has been somewhat dismal. But that should not lead to melodramatic despair about the organisation's future. The European project has been around for some 70 years, since the foundation of the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951, and over that time it has survived many crises and self-inflicted wounds, and more than quadrupled in size. Perhaps it's time to recognise that it is quite a resilient organisation. In fact, if you're looking for political unions that are in deep trouble or threatened to break up, the US and the UK are currently the more plausible candidates than the EU. America has just seen Congress stormed by an angry mob, and one of its two major political parties has gone sour on democracy. The UK is struggling to cope with the revival of violence in Northern Ireland and to fend off a second independence referendum in Scotland, which could see the country lose a third of its territory. Compared with this, the EU's problems seem relatively mild. Scepticism about the EU's long-term future is persistent nevertheless. It may stem from the organisation's unique nature. It is an international organisation with many of the characteristics of a state, including a currency, a parliament, a supreme court, and a central bank. This hybrid nature of the EU invites outsiders used to dealing with nation states to regard the EU as unnatural or even deformed, and therefore an obvious candidate for an early death, like a human born with organs in the wrong place. In reality, the threat of an existential crisis destroying the EU is receding. After the UK's vote for Brexit in 2016, there was a clear risk that other European countries might also quit the EU. In France, the far-right leader Marine Le Pen campaigned for Frexit, while Italy's Matteo Salvini, leader of the right-wing Northern League Party, promoted the idea that his country should leave the euro. But European nationalists have now changed their tunes. And as she prepares for next year's French presidential election, Le Pen has abandoned all talk of leaving the EU and has promised to keep the euro. Her new policy is to stay inside the EU and campaign for a Europe of nations. In Italy, Salvini is currently supporting a technocratic and pro-EU government led by Mario Draghi, the former president of the European Central Bank. Le Pen and Salvini have not suddenly become emotional Europhiles, but they can read opinion polls. In France, these suggest that the large majority of people support staying inside the EU. In Italy, at the start of the coronavirus crisis, there were surveys suggesting that more than 40% of Italians wanted to quit the EU. But since then, the EU has put together a multi-million pound COVID recovery fund, much of which is heading Italy's way. Salvini seems to have decided that the calls to leave the EU or the euro are just not what the electorate wants to hear. Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, who loves to pour scorn on Brussels and lambast liberalism, is in a similar position. He knows that his country benefits massively from EU funds and access to its single market. However bad relations with Brussels got, Orban's talk is never going to stalk out of the EU. He may be cynical, but he is not stupid. The adjustment process runs in both directions, and the EU is very uncomfortable about the direction of the events in Hungary and Poland, and has taken both countries to court over their breaking of the rule of law. But it is likely to throw either of them out of the club. A victory for Marine Le Pen in 2022, which is possible, could also be a profound shock for Brussels and the establishment. But if Frexit is off the menu, the EU would probably absorb the blow if she did win. With the passage of time, the European project may become increasingly secure, and opinion polls show that young people are more pro-EU than older voters. And changing international environment is also boosting the cause for the EU, with China and Russia both looking more threatening, and the US is looking less and less reliable. The case for Europeans sticking together is becoming more compelling. And none of this means that the EU should be complacent about its future any more than China, the US, or the UK can assume that their political stability is guaranteed. The mistake is to believe that the EU is unique and often baffling political structures that make it particularly vulnerable to collapse. In reality, the EU is careful and evolving balance between national and supranational power. But between technocracy and democracy, there is a source of stability and strength, not of weakness or fragility. And I completely agree. The EU is not going anywhere. Like it or not, the EU is here to stay. And even if Le Pen somehow wins the next presidential French election, I very much doubt it. Like I say, I will be surprised if she wins, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility. I don't think the French left would ever, first of all, let her get in. I think they would absolutely vote the other way just to stop her from getting in. But even if she did get in, the French left would make her life a living hell. They would do everything to oppose her. This would not be an easy ride for her to take. And trust me, it ain't going to be good for her, even if she does get in. But again, I doubt it. But again, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. So, as always, I've always said that it would be funny to go back as far as you could to track British Eurosceptics saying the EU is going to fall at this point, and just keep on going and have underneath them like a timeline saying, oh yeah, Nigel Farage predicted the EU would fall here, but it hasn't, and here's him predicting that again, and also it hasn't done it here. Again, it would be a funny video to make, but a lot of archival footage research would be needed, and trust me, I've done that in the past. I used to make what are called death videos way back in the past. So whenever a celebrity or a big politician dies, there are quick, shall we say, VTs, a brief synopsis of their lives to run. I can tell you it's very, very time consuming, and trust me, there is a lot of footage to go through. So as always, thanks for watching. Please do remember to hit that like and share button, and of course down below there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And thank you to all those people that do support me that way. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.